The idea of the film, which was really different, was to allow Kurt to tell the story of his life through the best way he could, which is his art. Because with Kurt Cobain, I never encountered anyone like this before. I mean, we all know artists who do different things. Like I know these guys all play, they do sound design and they play instruments and photography and whatnot. But Kurt, worked in equal parts in oral traditions and visual traditions. So he did, he was doing audio collage and film score, and of course the music, the Nirvana music, which was his greatest artistic output. And then visually he was doing the Super 8 films, and he was doing the paintings and the drawings. And so in a way, the film was intended to be an oral and visual sort of autobiography of his life that I don't think anyone else could have. I just don't know any other artists who work so expressively in those things. It's not that he's Picasso with his art, and I think that's one of the things that's actually great, is that's very relatable. The doodling that he does is all stuff that we probably did when we were kids.
Now, in that 8-year period from when you first talked to Courtney about it, at what point did you have access to the material and were you able to suddenly see what you had to work with and begin to be able to shape that? Right.
That was in early 2013. We finally were given the keys to the storage facility. And at that point, I'd been thinking about the film for 5 years. So in my mind, this storage facility was going to look like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark or Citizen Kane. And it was going to be this vast warehouse of all the amazing stuff. And, as you may imagine, if you've ever been to a storage facility, they're a little innocuous, and there's a industrial lighting and industrial carpet. And I walked in this room, and there were some paintings around on the walls, and then there were about 12 boxes in the middle. And it was visually quite underwhelming. But it goes to show you that it's quality, not quantity, because what I didn't know at that moment was one of those boxes was going to contain 107 cassettes featuring 200 hours of never before heard audio.
Wow.
And Kurt would record everything. So like the scene in the movie where he goes to answer the phone and he says, "No, she's not here." I mean, all that stuff, he would record himself when he was watching television. I mean, it was really crazy. Like, he would just hit play and record, and he would write a song, or he'd cook, or he'd do whatever. And he would also do things where he'd write in his journal and then record the journal. And so the story he tells of losing his virginity, to me, is just it's a piece of art. It's he wrote it, and then he performed it, and he did several takes on it. So again, it's another form of expression for him. If the greatest tribute the one could do for Kurt Cobain is to make an honest movie, because that's part of why Kurt resonates with people, is because he brought so much honesty and integrity to his work. And I think as a result of us taking this unflinching look, that the audiences that I've been exposed to are not turned off by Kurt, but actually I think it's almost more endearing by the end. And what I like to say is that we weren't trying to tear him down, and we weren't trying to put him on a pedestal. We were just simply trying to look him in the eye. And at the end of the day, I think when you strip away the layers of mythology, the man is more endearing than the myth.
How do you approach adapting Kurt's music for the film in a way that will make it work dramatically for the film's sake, but also feel like it's true to him as a composer?
That was actually one of the great challenges, but I mean, it's a great role to be cast in as a composer. I mean, I usually spend a lot of time torturing myself in a room trying to find out what the musical language of the character and the stories are, trying to create themes. And in this one, Brett rightfully said, this is Kurt. We're all about Kurt. There's not original music here by you, and this is going to be your adaptations of his body of work. And what an amazing, iconic body of work. So Brett had the idea, it was really inspired actually, to treat, particularly the first half of the film, to find arrangements for some of these songs that were quite dreamlike and almost childlike, innocent. I called them ice cream truck versions. And that was just a joy, really, to explore those songs from a completely different level. Brett and I have talked this about this before. We don't really sort of see it as, well, we're the documentary guys and these are the dramatic guys. You know, we're telling stories. He said to me, Kid Stays in Pictures is an opera. And I absolutely understood what he meant. To me, it's you're using music to deepen the story, get inside the characters' heads. There's not a line that I consider, and I you know, we do it that way. The difference in this film was just to be using someone else's music. I mean, Brett and I had this process where we'd be listening to things, and he would say, "Well, okay, now what would this, you know, how would this live in the Kurt realm? Like, how does this?" And I think he did it with all his departments, and it was an interesting acid test to put things to, because we could say, well, is it the young Kurt we're thinking about, or is it Kurt as he would be now? And you know, are these interesting and different arrangements of his music? How does it still channel him somehow? And it was fascinating, really. And there were some times when Brett would come in and he would say, you know, the flute's not going to fly with Kurt. Like, that's just not. It's not a Kurt thing. And you know, and there were other instruments that Brett and I use all the time where he just went, not going to fly with Kurt. So we had to find that space there.
One of the greatest things that Cameron and I like about working with Brett, the number one rule is there are no rules. And, you know, doing all these films that I've done and that Cameron's worked on, there's a certain foundation and a tradition to an approach of a soundtrack that in this documentary world, we're not quite as restrained. And took liberties with treating sound, processing sound, panning sound, that you don't really get to do in a lot of traditional movies. And so that was challenging and fun for us. And as Jeff said, when we started this, Brett said, look, I don't want to hear your sound design. I don't necessarily hear your mixing the way you do it. I don't want to hear his score that he don't. I want us to all try to be, and we had to kind of wrap our heads around it a little bit, because how do you do that? I want you to think, you know, Kurt was really into audio, and I didn't know that. You know, I found out doing this documentary how much playing around he did, and that sort of was a little inspiration. Let's try delays on this, and let's pan this, and let's pitch that, or whatever it was. I felt we could do that, and most of the time Brett was receptive to it. You know, we might go a little too far, but we were permitted to do that, and that's one of the fun things for me.
Well, it was critical to embrace Kurt and all of his sound design he had discovered, and use those pieces to create other bits and essentially find the emotion for each bit and attach sound to the emotional the bit of each scene, and never lose sight of Kurt. And Brett was right there to point out when he was present and if he was slipping away, and he reeled us back in. It was quite a journey.